Recording in progress.
Non. Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue au Théâtre national de la presse pour la conférence de presse de la vérificatrice générale Karen Hogan. Before we begin, we have few important preventive measures to share. So to prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incident that can cause injury, remind all person and participant to keep their earpieces away from all microphone at all the times. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that we will find on the table. Please consult the card on the table for the guideline to prevent audio feedback. These measures are in place so that we can protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Thank you for that. Madame Hogan, c'est à vous.
Merci. Good morning. Bonjour et merci de vous joindre à moi. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Earlier today, my office delivered 5 audit reports to Parliament. All touch on whether government organizations are delivering expected results for Canadians. I'm missing a page, but that's okay. We'll get started. And excuse me for 2 seconds. Anyways, we'll start with the first audit is on industrial technological benefits. I'm missing the first few pages of my notes. La politique exige que les entreprises qui obtiennent des contrats de défense investissent un montant équivalent au Canada. Durant la période de notre audit, elle a visé 99 approvisionnements d'une valeur totale d'au moins 39 milliards de dollars. Overall, we found that the department could not demonstrate that the policy met its objectives. The department had not established clear rules and guidance for applying the policy, which led to inconsistencies. Of eligible procurements over $100 million, we found 2 in which contractor commitments were below 100% of the contract value, and 8 that included no obligations at all. We also found that the department lacked effective ways to measure the policy's economic benefits and the creation of jobs, and that it did not track potential impacts of the policy on defense procurement. Étant donné l'ampleur des obligations que la politique des retombées industrielles et technologiques impose aux entrepreneurs, il est important qu'Innovation, Sciences et Développement économique Canada ait des moyens efficaces de démontrer si la politique contribue à la création d'emplois, à l'innovation et à la croissance économique. Notre prochain audit a examiné les efforts déployés par le Secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor du Canada pour mener l'élaboration d'une approche nationale de validation numérique de l'identité des personnes. Une approche nationale est importante pour garantir un accès uniforme et sécurisé aux services en ligne des secteurs publics et privés pour les Canadiennes et Canadiens partout au pays. We found that the Secretariat had delayed work on a national approach because of a lack of funding. However, it had worked with Employment and Social Development Canada and Shared Services Canada on a needed component of a national approach, a one-stop, online sign-in system that validates a person's identity to access federal services. This would replace the almost 90 separate sign-in portals currently managed by individual federal departments. Some provinces and territories have begun implementing their own identity and access management programs. This means that digital access across levels of government is evolving without common parameters or guidance. A national approach would ensure the interoperability of secure and reliable identity validation systems across public and private sectors. As we concluded our audit, it was unclear whether the development of a national approach would proceed and whether the transition to a new federal sign-in system could be funded without presenting an unmanageable financial burden on federal organizations. Nos 3 prochains audits ont porté sur des programmes et services qui servent directement la population et les entreprises canadiennes. Le premier de ces programmes est Emploi d'été Canada, qui fournit des subventions aux employeurs admissibles afin de créer des emplois pour les jeunes de 15 à 30 ans. Nous avons travaillé avec Statistique Canada pour analyser les données disponibles et avons constaté que ce programme est dans l'intérêt des jeunes. Bien que de nombreux facteurs influencent les résultats à long terme en matière d'emploi, notre analyse a fait ressortir qu'après 9 ans, les participants du programme Emploi-Été Canada gagnaient en moyenne presque 6 000 $ de plus par an que ceux et celles qui n'en avaient pas participé. Nous avons également constaté que depuis 2008, les jeunes qui font face à des obstacles étaient sous-représentés dans le programme, ce qui est préoccupant car il est censé prioriser les possibilités de travail pour ces jeunes. We found that Employment and Social Development Canada did not collect or analyze data to know how many summer jobs the funding created or to report on long-term outcomes of participants in the program. Given the benefits that this program delivers, the department needs to use data to improve the success of all youth in the labor market, including priority groups. Our next audit examined programs to support seniors. In 2023, there were 7.5 million people over the age of 65 in Canada, a total that could almost double within 20 years. In 2018, Employment and Social Development Canada was tasked with supporting the Minister of Seniors to better understand and meet the needs of seniors. We found that the department did not have a complete picture of the issues faced by seniors or the programs in place across Canada to serve them. Le programme de la sécurité de la vieillesse vise à renforcer la sécurité du revenu des personnes âgées. Nous avons constaté que le ministère ne pouvait pas démontrer si les prestations versées suffisaient aux besoins financiers des personnes âgées. Même si les paiements de la sécurité de la vieillesse sont régulièrement ajustés en fonction de l'inflation en appliquant l'indice des prix à la consommation, le ministère ne pouvait pas démontrer si le niveau d'inflation est différent pour les personnes âgées par rapport à la population canadienne générale. Nous avons aussi constaté que le ministère ne s'était pas donné les moyens d'évaluer efficacement les résultats du programme Nouveau Horizon pour les aînés. Il s'était appuyé sur l'information contenue dans les demandes de financement pour évaluer l'incidence du programme, sans savoir si les projets financés produisaient les résultats voulus. Comme la population des personnes âgées au Canada continue d'augmenter, Emploi et Développement social Canada doit renforcer ses analyses pour garantir que les programmes d'aide prennent en compte l'évolution des besoins des personnes âgées. Notre dernier audit a porté sur le programme du compte d'urgence pour les entreprises canadiennes. Ce programme a été mis en place pendant la pandémie COVID-19 pour aider les petites entreprises canadiennes à couvrir des dépenses qu'elles ne pouvaient pas reporter. We found that Export Development Canada, EDC, acted quickly to provide $49.1 billion in loans to help almost 900 small businesses across Canada. However, the program was not managed with due regard for value for money. We found significant weaknesses in EDC's contract management. It relied on a single vendor, Accenture, to deliver the program. The non-competitive contracts awarded to Accenture represented 92% of the total value of $342 million in contracts related to the CEBA program. EDC gave too much control to Accenture over key aspects of contracts such as the scope of work and pricing. EDC failed to exercise basic controls in contract management, such as monitoring whether amounts paid aligned with the work performed. Since ongoing program delivery uses Accenture's proprietary IT systems, EDC will have to rely on these non-competitive contracts until at least 2028. Nous avons également constaté que ni le ministère des Finances ni Affaires mondiales Canada n'avaient assuré une surveillance efficace de l'optimisation des ressources. À cause de cette non-reconnaissance de leurs responsabilités, des éléments fondamentaux du programme, comme la mesure des résultats, avaient été reportés ou délaissés. Le ministère des Finances n'avait pas remis en question les dépenses administratives de décès, ni fixé de limite globale pour ces dépenses. Au 31 mars 2024, celle-ci se chiffrait à 853 millions de dollars. While 91% of loans were issued to eligible businesses, we estimated that about $3.5 billion went to ineligible recipients. I am concerned that EDC only partially agreed with our recommendation that it should carry out additional work to identify all ineligible recipients and recover the amounts involved. Unlike other COVID-19 programs, CEBA is a loan program with payments that will be ongoing for several years, while action on defaulted loans is just beginning. Value for money will be further compromised without better monitoring and improved plans to recover defaulted loans. Thank you, merci. I'm now ready to answer questions.
Pour la période de questions, on va commencer par une question de suivi par journaliste. Puis je pense qu'on aurait le temps pour une autre tour si jamais vous avez d'autres questions. So for the question period, we'll start with one question, one follow-up, and if you have further question, we can do a second round. No problem. So we'll start with Minael Naki, CTV. Yeah.
In your report on CEBA, you said that the finance department should have exercised more oversight. They disagree with that, and they're saying that the EDC was the one that was responsible to administer CEBA. Do you agree with that? What's your response to begin with?
So we issued a recommendation to the Department of Finance that it needed to fill in the policy gaps that are there. This is a unique program because a Crown Corporation, which is supposed to be at arm's length from the government, was asked to deliver a program that typically the public service would deliver. With that, I would have expected that the policy lead, which is Department of Finance, would have provided better oversight, especially when Export Development Canada asked for additional oversight over program and the program expenditures. In the end, there's this accountability void, whether it be the Department of Finance or Global Affairs or EDC. And when you have an accountability void, there's people who aren't keeping eyes on the dollars anymore. There is bad management decisions that go unchallenged, and ultimately no spending limit put on a big program.
And I also want to ask, I'm wondering, like, based on your experience, I know that last year or earlier this year, you looked into ArriveCan, for example. I'm wondering if, based on your role here, are you seeing a pattern of mismanagement, or is it really justifiable that the COVID pressure resulted in a series of situations like the CEBA here, for example?
Well, I think regardless of the situation, and I've said that before, that the pandemic wasn't a reason to throw rules out the window when we were talking about a previous audit report over here. I would say it made sense at the beginning that a COVID program saw a quick rollout with limited prepayment controls. And then I would have expected the government to adjust along the way, especially a program that is as long as a loan program. This wasn't a temporary subsidy. This wasn't a permanent subsidy. It was a temporary subsidy. Every business knew they were eventually going to have to repay this back. And the government knew that they were either going to have to deal with loan repayments or work on the collection of defaulted loans. So I would have expected better life cycle planning. And that is one of our recommendations, that wasn't done. Again, a policy gap that I would expect Department of Finance should be filling in. But a Crown is supposed to be at arm's length. And so giving them the freedom to run the program still means that the government should have kept their eye on the spending around delivering that program.
Olivia Stevanovic, CBC.
Thanks for taking our questions. Auditor General Hogan, we received a statement from the Department of Finance about your report on the CEBA loans. I just want to read in part some of it. It says that while you offer some good and useful recommendations, the report fails to properly acknowledge that CEBA was designed and delivered during a global pandemic. I wonder if we can get your reaction to that and whether you think it's acceptable for the federal government to use a national emergency as an excuse for what happened here.
So I would expect a basic level of due diligence and monitoring of expenditures, regardless of whether a pandemic exists. I think our report does an excellent job of balancing the positives and then highlighting opportunities for improvement. This program did see $49 billion rolled out to almost 900,000 small businesses very quickly. Most businesses waited less than a month to receive their funding. That's a positive. The negatives are that EDC did not properly manage their contracts. They relied heavily on one vendor to deliver this program, and then the two departments who should have been monitoring it failed in their oversight responsibilities. So I agree that at the beginning, quick rollout, limited prepayment controls make sense, but as the years go on, I would expect that the public service adjusts and goes to competitive contracts and recognizes the need to bring work and information back into the public service, and we are not seeing that with this program.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, how do you think the federal government should go about retrieving the $8.5 billion that it's owed, and what should be the consequences for the $3.5 billion that was given out to ineligible businesses?
Mm-hmm. So in the $8.5 billion, there are still loans that are what the industry would call performing. Individuals are still making monthly repayments, and really there's a next big milestone on December of 2026 when all of the loans will become due. There are also loans, however, that have either been defaulted or loans that went to ineligible recipients. We saw that Export Development Canada, during the rollout of the program, identified businesses that were ineligible to the tune of about $2 billion. They were informed and they needed to repay by the end of last year. About $1 billion of that is still uncollected. So I would expect that the government will continue to take action to recover those funds. The other $1.5 billion we identified during our audit because there had been no post-payment work on some of the loans. And that's where Export Development Canada only partially agreed with our recommendations. And I'm concerned about the lack or the reticence, I guess, of wanting to go back and recover funds. EDC first needs to identify if these businesses are really ineligible and then decide whether or not recovery is going to happen. If the government doesn't want to recover, I expect that they're just going to be clear and transparent with Canadians.
Mylène Crête, La Presse.
Bonjour. Je voulais savoir, est-ce que le ministère de l'Emploi et du Développement social est en mesure de justifier la bonification de 10 % de la pension de sécurité de vieillesse pour les aînés de 75 ans et plus dans ce que vous avez analysé?
On n'a pas regardé les ajustements aux prestations pour la sécurité de la vieillesse. On a vraiment pris la première étape pour identifier si Emploi et Développement social Canada appuyait le ministre des aînés pour lui fournir avec l'information nécessaire pour savoir si les programmes fédéraux comblaient des lacunes dans les programmes qui appuyaient les âgés ou s'il y avait des ajustements requis. Ce qu'on a constaté, c'est que la sécurité de la vieillesse, le paiement de base n'a pas été analysé. Et le fait que ce paiement est ajusté pour l'indice des prix à la consommation qui reflète l'inflation, c'est important de savoir si les âgés sont confrontés à une inflation qui est différente à celui de la population générale. En ce moment, leurs analyses manquent beaucoup de détails et n'a pas assez de rigueur. Alors, on a émis une recommandation qu'ils font une meilleure analyse de l'inflation et des prestations de base pour la sécurité de la vieillesse.
Et en ce qui a trait au compte d'urgence pour les entreprises canadiennes, pour les contrats qui ont été octroyés à la firme Accentra, est-ce que vous voyez des similitudes avec les contrats qui avaient été accordés à GC Strategies pour Arrivcan, c'est-à-dire sans appel d'offres, les critères sont déterminés par l'entreprise elle-même?
Je pense qu'on ne peut pas comparer les deux. Vraiment, pour Arrivcan, c'était un ministère qui essayait de d'établir un logiciel pour appuyer les mesures de santé à nos frontières. Ici, c'est une société d'État, alors ça amène un enjeu différent, qui a été demandé de livrer un programme de prêt. EDC avait informé le ministre des Finances et Affaires mondiales qu'il n'avait pas la capacité, les compétences ou les outils pour livrer le programme, mais ils ont quand même été demandés de le faire. Ils ont avisé le ministère des Finances qu'ils allaient se fier sur une tiers partie pour livrer le programme. Durant une urgence, je comprends bien d'avoir des processus non concurrentiels, ce qui a été le premier contrat émis à Accenture. Mais je m'attendrais qu'après cela, qu'il y ait des changements pour rendre les processus concurrentiels et pas avoir une dépendance, de ne pas se fier sur une tiers partie. En ce moment, le gouvernement est rattaché à Accenture jusqu'à 2028 à cause des contrats qui ont été émis d'une façon non concurrentielle.
Is there any other question? Olivia, no? Yep, okay.
I just wonder how you would recommend the government avoid the situation where it's dealing with a national emergency and it just turns to a single source vendor. How would you recommend that be avoided in the future? Because you can see a situation where that, the government may choose to only pick one vendor because it's the most efficient way of doing things. How would you, ensure or recommend that doesn't happen?
So there are exceptions to contracting rules, either in the public service and even at EDC, their own procurement rules that say competition should be the way to go, but there are exceptions. An emergency is such an exception. Or whether there is potentially additional costs if you deviate from a vendor. So while that might have been documented in some cases here, what I would expect to see is to deal with the crisis, you do that. Afterwards, you then start to adjust. When you look at contracts here, some of them were issued in 2024, well after where we were at the start of 2020. So I would have expected that competitive processes would have been in place, or at a minimum, that clauses would have been included in the contracts to make sure that information could flow back to the federal public service or to transition skills and competencies. I said this during ArriveCan, I said it during professional services, and I'll repeat it here, is it's okay to rely on a vendor when you need capacity or skills, but you need to think about how you bring that back into the public service after a period of time.
And can I just have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
Is this more concerning to you than what you saw with ArriveCan?
What's concerning for me is that there were basic contract management rules that we saw EDC apply during our professional services contract work that they didn't apply here. But it's more, in my mind, the lack or hesitation to want to identify ineligible recipients and try and recover those funds. This is similar to the response in 2022 after the wage subsidy program, where the government didn't want to identify ineligible businesses and take measures. And as I said then, and I repeat now, the first step is to know which businesses or individuals are ineligible, and then the next decision is about recovery or not. And that's where the government could be flexible, but they just need to be transparent with Canadians. Merci.